So I just figured something out. Now I should have known this before, but uh, it used to be it's like one of the sheets is like real long-winded introduction. It used to be when you woke up in the morning and you had to figure out like what the weather is outside. You literally like sometimes you actually when I grew up you read the newspaper like it says, "Ooh, what's the weather supposed to be?" And then like TV got much more advanced, so you got to watch the weather report. And then then like all these AccuWeather forecasts like all the time. And then when you got into DFS, it's like we didn't even care what the actual weather said in the thing. We just went to Roth. Whatever Roth said the weather was going to be. We looked at the storms or whatever it is. Now it's like so funny. I don't even need to know what the weather is. I don't need to read the reports. All I do is I run my projections and run my optimals, and I immediately know how windy it's going to be in Chicago. Okay, I don't even live there, but I just run my projections for the early slate, and I can already tell you the wind is blowing out in Chicago without even looking at any weather forecast. I don't have to leave my house. I don't have to put on the newspaper. I don't have to turn the TV. I just run my projections, and I see that there's probably 20-mile-an-hour winds in Chicago. I presume I'm correct, right?
I don't think they're 20, but yeah, they're definitely are winds blowing out.
So all that is a long-winded way of saying that game looks pretty good.
Looks pretty good. Looked good yesterday. Looks good again today. What do you say about it? It's a smaller slate with 6 games where you have some real good options. I think that the chalk is going to condense on that Cubs Giants game, so I'm going to try to use it as pieces. I'm going to treat it a little bit like a Coors game because I think the ownership will get pretty high.
Yeah.
So that's sort of I guess where you start the slate. Like, yep. What are we doing with that game, and then what else are we doing for pitching? I also think like the Diamondbacks will get the next most ownership, but the thing that's important to remember about these early slates is people really, the longer these teams take to get out their lineups, it does tend to lower the ownership a little bit, with the exception of the stud players. But maybe you can take a chance on a guy who may be in the lineup tonight or something. It's just something to think about if you're going to play the Arizona stack. So I do like the Cubs, and I actually like the Cubs and Blue Jays the best, but I'm probably going to force myself into Milwaukee and Minnesota in some lineups just because and again my strategy, and I sort of went through it a little bit last night in the some of the Brandon Adams stuff, and it just got me thinking. I guess it just sort of felt like a little bit more confirming about things that I've been believing for a while, that there are so many different ways to play these things, that these 5-man, and I understand that you're going to 5-man stack and all that stuff, but it's just interesting to try and take. I mean, he went way overboard with it. Like I don't know how often he's been doing that. I haven't been watching his lineups, but when you're max entering big buy-in tournaments with lineups of 2-1-1-1-1-1-1s on big slates, it's kind of shocking to see. And I'm not going to go that far on this slate, but I'm looking at more like a 3-3-2 build or something like that as a way of getting different if I was to play the chalk, or maybe just say F it and maybe you play a full Milwaukee or Minnesota stack.
So I'm not saying this is going to tie into what you just said in a second. But those of you that follow my Twitter, I tweeted about I thought he's a really, really strong DFS player named Nerdy Tenor.
Yeah, I know.
And I know I've never met him personally. I just see his results. I saw I think Blender interviewed him once or something like that. He's like one of those guys. He doesn't really know much about sports, doesn't care much about sports. He just kind of just does the data and does the spreadsheets work. And he had a really big day the other day in kind of the fringy sports. He won that King of the Baseline tennis thing for $100,000, and then he also same day got he chopped a UFC the UFC thing with a very, very offbeat lineup builds. He stacked a fight, and normally like stacking fights is really bad in GPPs in general. And the only time it's ever usually decent is when it's the main event. And he actually stacked like a non-main event fight, and it worked out. I mean, it almost never does. And what's even weirder is that it wasn't even unique. Like 2 other people found that also. So it's like if he's going to win, I would expect that he should get paid the full boat for that. And the reason I bring this up is, in light of the Brandon Adams things, I was actually going to reach out to him and ask him if he like intentionally decided that it was a good idea to stack that fight, or if just because of his data sets and his simulation, he just got to it. You know what I mean? So
Right.
like, I was wondering because that whether Brandon, for example, do you think that he, and you probably know better than I do, like did he intentionally decide to go like with that type of construction, or does he have just kind of like this data thing that just whatever it spits out, like, well, I'm getting a bunch of 501s, I'm just going to go with it. And I think that's an interesting question.
I think there's a combination, and I've met him a few times, and you actually probably know him better than I do because you might have known him from poker.
Right.
I've played poker with him a few times. We had some TV tables together, but mostly he didn't even remember any of this. But he knew me from Roto Grinders, and we were at a live final together, and he had started playing, and he was playing. I was seeing him win, like he won a millionaire tournament already, and he was asking me. He said, like, look, he goes, especially as it relates to basketball and baseball, can you help teach me?
Yeah.
At the time, I wasn't doing any of that. Like, are you kidding me? I was like, can you just teach me about how to be a genius? How about that? Like, because he's teaching at Harvard also on top of all this. He's one of the best poker players and one of the best, DFS players in the world. I don't know, and I'm interested. I don't know him well enough to do that. This is years ago, but I do think it's just interesting to just to think about things a little bit differently. And the one thing about that tournament that I would say is a little bit different than most tournaments we play. Anytime it's 50% first place is getting 50%. If you like any of the chalk, doing any of those little changes, making it a 4-2-2 or a 4-3-1 or something instead of a 5, whatever, is a really good way to just really differentiate yourself. So maybe that had something to do with it. But it is an interesting question, and maybe if we some of the guys we do know, maybe we could ask them some questions about that in the future when we talk about some, instead of doing lineup reviews, with just winning, talking about sort of strategies and how people are using their data sets. And I think some people would be happy to talk about it, and others probably won't. But I think it's really interesting because I think that so much of what you hear in the industry is the same regurgitated, this stack, that stack. And not that there's anything wrong, not that that's even the wrong way. Maybe it's that way for a reason. But this is just something to think about. Anyway, for me, it just got me thinking a little bit.
And to kind of piggyback off that, something I mentioned last night in the midnight stuff where I was talking about is, it seems to be all the rage now is the battle between like which site is coming up with the best simulation approach to this, and it makes me wonder what lineups are going to look like, and there's always a combination between automating things and using like your gut and knowledge and common sense, and as things become too automated, that becomes not only I think bad play, you know what I mean, to be too automated, but also more groupthinky type plays. Like the better the sims get, then the more other people will be on the same type of simulation data, and not only is it going to be more automated, but it's going to be more concentrated. So it's I think it's interesting times. So we'll just kind of see. Like, so here's an example. Now I know we don't have too much time for the early slate, but when I first ran the like use SaberSim as an example, right? So I used SaberSim and I ran my stuff just based on my projections, whatever, and it spit out exactly what I kind of referred to. Just a whole bunch of San Francisco, a whole bunch of Chicago, right? It was like 70% each of them, if you want to know the truth, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I made one little adjustment, when I ran like a contest sim where I basically just went up to full like radioactive ownership fade juice. Let's just put it that way. Mm-hmm. It looks like totally different. Like now I could totally justify this one. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, but I'll just like tell you. Like when you do that, I'm getting 54% San Diego, right? Like 36% Cleveland, like 30% Philly, and you'd have to struggle to find a single and literally 0 Cubs. Right. So maybe somewhere in the middle is what you're supposed to do. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure.
I feel like you can make a good argument every which way with it. Like, you know what I mean? Like maybe it is somewhere in the middle. Maybe on certain days it's the other. It's really hard to know. And there's not exactly a direct, clear answer, especially as it relates to baseball, where there's no like game flow situations. I do want to note though, like because of what we talked about yesterday, and realistically today, probably not going to make it. Well, I mean, Mike Tauchman will probably get in that Cubs lineup at some point today. And he had one at bat yesterday. These are the little things to notice. Like when you see the highest owned players being guys who have huge pinch hit risks, for maybe 1 or 2 at bats with the way the Cubs are playing right now, that's a really big thing to try to get off of. And shame on me for not getting off of it too early last night, although I'm still happy I hung on for a good night and a good cash and all that stuff. But
did you hang on there?
Yeah, actually pretty easily. I won by 50 places. Yeah. So it was pretty, it was a good night. But the thing I was thinking is like you have Christopher Morel as an example, who may end up being the highest owned player on the slate, who legitimately might have 5 at bats or he might have 1 at bat. That is absolutely in the realm of possibility. It's unlikely Alex Wood gets yanked right away, but we might even see San Francisco. This game doesn't start yet. They might announce an opener for Alex. You know what I mean? And you don't know what they're going to do, and they're like 2 teams counteracting, playing a playoff style baseball, and you have all the ownership in that game. It just feels like it just gives you an extra reason to try to fade more of it. So I'm using pieces from that game that I feel like are not pinch hit risks as side pieces, but I don't want to make my full stacks. I don't think I have. I just think it's really hard to win if you just make a full Cubs stack. And we say all this with last night, where literally every player, there was like 7 guys, 25% owned or higher, and I think all of them hit at least 1 home run. Like it's just crazy when that happens, though.
Now I was going to make a point. Now I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, I know. I literally don't remember.
No worries. Well, we can get to it. So what is showing up for you? Let's talk a little bit about pitching today, because I think that is a really, other than
no, that's what I was going to say. So again, piggybacking my point off what you just said is that when you're developing your skill set and how to play and like separating like what looks good versus what you should be fading, and fading the industry and fading what everything's doing, especially when you get into football season and all this stuff, is there's still plenty of room for baseball knowledge, you know what I mean, and sports knowledge,
right?
To have a really, really big edge. Like the thing that you just mentioned, that observation about the way teams are trending from a managing perspective, you know what I mean? Like that's something that for lack of a better description, projection systems are just not going to account for. Okay, they're just not going to, because one of the overarching presumptions of projection systems is that unless it can be quantified, you just can't account for it, and so it gets ignored. But just because you can't know exactly what it means numerically doesn't mean you shouldn't account for it in some way, So that and that's why you've always been like really, really good at basketball, especially into the playoffs, because you can kind of like project and see what teams are thinking of doing, you know what I mean, that might be different than what they had been doing, and so that's really, really big. So if the Cubs are going to be one of those teams that are going to try to emulate Tampa, and you know what I mean, and be more, offbeat about, how many at bats and the stuff, stuff that we can't get into all of it, but if you could pick up on that early, and then you could get a slate just like today. You know what I mean? Where they're all going to be chalk through the roof. This is a pretty good opportunity to leverage against that, I think.
I appreciate it. I think that makes a lot of sense. I actually want to get into this, and we'll talk about it maybe on our longer video, because we don't have as much time right now. But I would like to get into what I think my flaws have been, really just in a brief, 2 minutes on our next video, about what my flaws have been and what I've learned coming back with a different type of energy. Not that it's always going to translate to results, but I just feel like I'm in a very different mindset. And sometimes when you get bogged down in this, you start feeling it's just all random in baseball. And I just wasn't as dialed in. And I really have tried to pay attention. I watched all the games last night. I was flipping back and forth. I just want to dial in for the rest of the year and really just realize that's a little bit where I'm getting my edge. And if I'm not really getting my edge, I'm not being the best player I can. Sure, I might understand lineup construction and I can tell these teams and the trends or whatever. But there's a part, I need to be more this version of me. I need to really, really dial in and try and get any little edge I can.
So to answer your question about who the good plays are, I mean, Zach Davies is really cheap against, you know what I mean? Like he's 5,600 against, the worst team, so he's going to look good in pretty much every format, I guess. And the idea, I mean, listen, if you ask me to make a lineup, you pair either him with Peralta or him with Wheeler, and then you just roll, Now that doesn't mean you can't do other things. So you can play Peralta and Wheeler together, and you can do that pretty easily if you want another trade.
Right.
And I don't know if I have it in me to fade both of those top guys, like to do something like Davies with something else. You know what I mean? Maybe, or talk to me about that. Like, what are your thoughts pitching wise?
Yeah, so like in my big buy-in, I do have like this is one of those situations where I know what Eric's going to say. Like Eric Johnson just popped in the chat. I know this is, oh, we're really going to play Zach Davies at 30% ownership. And then it's like, oh, imagine doing this all over Twitter. It's my least favorite thing about the industry. I absolutely despise that kind of stuff. That and talking about locks. I absolutely despise it when it comes to baseball, especially. Imagine doing this. Oh, like everybody's an idiot who does it. It's ridiculous. Zach Davies is 5,600 against a Colorado team that is pretty inept offensively. And it's good enough for me on this slate where I don't feel great about the other stuff. It's not 10K. Even playing Wheeler, it's still San Diego. I know they haven't been great, but this is still a lineup with some talent in it. You know what I mean? Like, I think that I would rather just take that shot with Davies, who's going to be pretty popular and honestly won't be crazy. I mean, all these guys just rate to be so similar. I think Ryu's a really good option. I think Gavin Williams is a good tournament play, but I also love the idea of playing Minnesota because no one's going to play Minnesota and no one's going to play Milwaukee, or hardly anybody can play Milwaukee. That's what I'm trying to figure out a way to do, is to play those teams, because that way I can get away with the chalkier pitchers. Right now I do have Peralta and Wheeler in my main lineup. Peralta and Davies in my main lineup. I think if you can get to Peralta and Wheeler, maybe you play that with Minnesota. That might be kind of interesting. You play two chalk pitchers, but they're probably not going to be as much paired together, and you have the lower owned stack that's cheap. I kind of like that idea. But I found Ryu, Williams, Peralta, and Davies to be my main guys. I am totally open to Zach Wheeler. I am less open to Michael Wacha. In fact, I think the Phillies are mildly interesting as a get different stack. And I think that Jordan Wicks is your gamble play. We've seen the Giants at times struggle against lefties. We've also seen them be good. Like they're sort of all over the map, but Jordan Wicks would be the get weird play that I had for today at 7K.
I will tell you, not necessarily make it the Eric Johnson play, but I'm not opposed to though. I'm not opposed to playing some Colorado.
100%. Oh, absolutely. If you're not playing Davies, you should absolutely be trying to target. I didn't mention it because my first build had 3 Colorado guys in it. It was a 4-3-1 with Colorado. But I just also think that, I mean, it's a good, just even looking at the run total, like people are going to play him just based on that alone. They have the third lowest run total on the third lowest run total on the slate, and they're 3.8. Like you're going to get, Davies is going to get played a ton. So I love the idea if you're not going to play him to get some Colorado. I just happen to prefer a little bit, hey, take a gamble on the Minnesota side. If Gavin, we've seen the good and the bad with Gavin Williams, right? We've seen him be absolutely unbelievable, unhittable, and we've seen him really struggle at times. Now, in all fairness, last time he struggled, he was facing the Dodgers. Worse crimes have been committed. You know what I mean?
I have another bit of advice, and I don't know why I'm picking the day where we have the least amount of time for this type of stuff, but it's right.
It's a small slate anyway.
And this is directed at Eric Johnson, actually, specifically, but more as a representation of people that go through things this way. So I know Eric from around. You know what I mean? Like he's on a lot of. Eric, I know this is not this is a bad thing. You're in a lot of discords. You absorb content from a lot of different places. And as do I, and when I run my hedge fund, and I've been running my hedge fund, my stock market for my stock portfolios for over 20 years, part of what makes me successful in that is probably almost all of what makes me successful is kind of reading the psychology of the people that I'm listening to, and kind of developing little profiles of people that I talk to. So like, for example, I have this one analyst that I talk to who recommends like certain stocks, and quite honestly, I could care less what he recommends, but what he does is he gives me a good sense for what a good amount of people are kind of thinking. Mm-hmm. So I can kind of gauge, what the public biases are, and be careful. So I mention this because be careful when you get so entrenched in these other communities. I won't mention them by name, but we know. I think we all know who I'm talking about. When you get entrenched in these other communities, you not only start to play kind of like them all. You know what I mean? Like it's like this is a XYZ type of play. This is a BMF type of play. You know what I mean? And you can tell you're doing that by when you start kind of talking like them. You know what I mean? Like when you start like using phrases that they use in Discord all the time. When you start like reacting in the same way that they do, then you start becoming that profile that you're trying to fade. You know what I mean? So just kind of, I don't want you to be careful, but it's kind of like cool intellectually to be cognizant of it. So like when you look at these different communities, like they think different ways and they all start to think the same. You know what I mean? And then they start to talk the same, and then and everybody's on the same stuff, you know? And so just be careful. And listen, it's fun to be part of all the communities if you want to know the truth. It could be, I'll give you an example. Like, I love like the Runs Pure Sports tennis Discord for no reason. You know what I mean? It's just a lot. It's like really, really fun. I put my dad jokes in there, and it's like whatever. And it's fun to do. But you know what? But if you get too, and this is the way human beings work, you get too entrenched in a community, you start to think alike, sort of, and it's not actually a good thing. You know what I mean? In this type of environment, you know what I mean? Yeah. When you're trying to like fade stuff, and so that's the reason I use him as an example. So I know that he's a very well educated, listener, right, of a lot of different places. But just be careful when you start talking like them and start saying things like them and start like and not only like gut reaction stuff. People say, well, XYZ this good. Whoa, I'm not playing Andrew Heaney's chalk, or I'm not playing that's why. Everything is just kind of like out there, and it's up to you to kind of figure out what to listen to and what not to. Remember when the first time that I started to play DFS, when they were teaching me how to play, my first process that I ever had in DFS was, okay, I do my projections, this is what I like, and now I have to figure out how to fade myself. That was literally my process. Like, this is what I want to play, and now I have to figure out why I'm not supposed to play it. And to be able to be self-realized, to realize yourself in that type of way is pretty important. So just again,
I totally agree with like everything you said. I think those are really, really good points. And I also, for what it's worth, I mean, I like Eric, and I've gotten this with all the time. Eric, I give him crap all the time because he knows what's coming, but he takes it, he dishes it back. He's hilarious. He's a great guy. So I really like him. I didn't want to, I do think it's a good example of what you're saying is something that really happens. And I think that's, again, I'll talk about it more as we go along in our other videos, but that's a big weakness for me this year is feeling like I wasn't in touch with baseball. With all the other sports, I feel very good about what I've done, but baseball, I feel like I've been out of sync a little bit. Anyway, people are liking what you're saying. Yeah, exactly. And then you start thinking that these plays are sure things, or like in baseball, just these things hitting are just so ridiculous. Last night when usually I won last night, but usually when the 25%ers, his hitters all have 20 plus fantasy points, I'm going to be losing almost every time. It's just never going to be right to play baseball players at 25% ownership, unless you have like a totally off the board elsewhere. You know what I mean? But when it happens, that's it. Eric says he's been kicked out of so many Discord groups because he's bad at groupthink. That's pretty funny. All right. So anyway, back to the slate. I've kind of come up with what I'm doing. I have my lineups. I just posted in the Discord for those people who are members. I would check that out. I have my two main lineups have a Colorado Toronto 3-3-2 with Milwaukee. And my other big one has a 3-2-2-1. And I'm okay with going that route today. And again, it's still depending on the Giants lineup. And also I'll get some idea how I'm doing early in case Peralta gets blown up. I can just sort of blow up or not blown up, even just doesn't have a good outing. I can sort of mess around and just throw totally different lineups in. This is the kind of slate that you should be late swapping, in my opinion. And if we're all going to be here at our computer during the day anyway, this is a good slate to do it.
I'm really happy that you said that. Okay, because I'm currently going to roll with this kind of like this San Diego idea, and for no other reason, not for no other reason, but I buy myself some time.
Right.
Because I'm also really thinking about playing Toronto, for example.
I love Toronto, but the problem is I just think the ownership is going to get out.
Right, but I'm also considering, the Colorado and Arizona, and depending on how other stuff's going early. Like if you get an hour of San Francisco, Chicago, and I fade it, and it is then busting. You know what I mean? I don't
Mhm.
necessarily got to go San Diego. I can play Arizona. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like if San Francisco, Chicago is busting, but if San Francisco and Chicago is kind of going off, then Arizona's not going to be enough for me. You know what I mean? I'm going to have to get a little more contrarian.
Exactly.
Um,
You have to make that pivot for sure.
the only real decision I have to make is early is whether I want to take the shot number one on Milwaukee, which you listen. I'm one of the great Milwaukee truthers. You know what I mean? I've played Milwaukee as much as anybody. And it's funny when they scratched when Keller originally was going to be a long reliever, and that was going to be an interesting discussion I was going to have with you. But they went a different route. But the team that you mentioned that I really want to consider is the Minnesota.
Mhm.
Before I guess the win was really taken into account the projection system. My original build was like almost all Minnesota.
Mhm.
I was really getting in all of that. So I might have to go ahead and up my ante a little bit, a little more Minnesota. But I like the San Diego. I like the late games. You know, as pivots off of Chicago, San Francisco.
Mhm.
So I think that's what I'm going to end up doing is something along those lines. As far as pitching goes, nothing really weird for me. I mean, listen, I might have like a Joe Ryan, just
Yeah, absolutely.
And listen, I have a lot of these. Like, I'll have a little Ryu. You know, I'll play a bunch of guys, but in general, it's going to be Wheeler, Peralta, Davies. Which certainly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. I am just getting a couple different builds in there, and I am going to play some of the Wicks though.
Okay.
I like the idea of getting a little bit.
Is that too much leverage?
No, I actually think there's a path for him to be one of the better scoring. I mean, look, he's put up 29 and 15 in his 2 games. He threw 90 pitches his last start. The Giants have struggled. Again, if they're not making contact, it doesn't matter where.
That's true.
And I just think he's got some talent. I really do. And I also think he could get blown up. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've got Giants elsewhere, but like I do think that he's a valuable play. I also really think that Ryu is getting overlooked today. Just to throw it out there, I think that people are not playing him, and I guess I don't blame them, but he's probably he's definitely a better pitcher than everybody. It's weird that a guy like this, he actually pitched really well this year, but he's just not like a DFS guy. He doesn't have like a real ceiling in terms of pitch count, but he's so effective with his pitches, it doesn't matter. I mean, he's been good lately. He's 3-1 this year with a 2.4 ERA. You know what I mean? And a reasonable strikeout rate, reasonable enough. Anyway, and I want to play some of those guys. I think the pitching is a little bit all over the place for me today, to be honest. Just taking a quick look here. I don't like that Diaz is not in the lineup for Colorado.
They announced the Colorado lineup?
Yeah, that makes me like the Colorado side a little bit less than I did, for what it's worth.
I don't even have that yet. Let me see who. Yeah, they didn't update into DraftKings. Oh yeah, they did. No Blackman either.
No Blackman. Yep, it's not a pretty lineup.
It ain't pretty, and that makes Davies a better.
Again, but more of a bump for Davies for me. But also, I'm still going to play like the McMahon. I'm still going to play the other Colorado guys I was going to play.
Yeah,
I'm not going to change because I'm not full stacking him. I've got him as 3-mans, so I'm not worried about it as much.
So I want to. So what I want to do is, I want to leave you guys with one thought, and then we'll talk about this another time. I almost got into the Twitter war. No, not Twitter war. It was actually one of the Discords. That wasn't even a war. I just posted a comment, and I left, and then like. That's so funny. I keep forgetting that. Like when you post something on Discord, then you're not around to talk about it. Like you run the risk of like 700 people commenting on it, and then you're not even around. You know what I mean? Like whatever. But I want you guys to think about this, and then we should probably get out of here so that we can finish our lineups and then get back in time for like 12:45 maybe.
Yep.
We'll do whatever. Is in a late swap sport, you can make the argument that you should always late swap. All right. And regardless of what's going on, the idea being that given the information of the first two couple of games, it's almost impossible that the lineups that you built before you had that information should be the exact same given that information. You know, you don't know exactly what you should be swapping to, but technically, you know, if something happens early, then you should be adjusting your lineup slate to reflect that. Now, you don't know exactly how you're supposed to do that, but theoretically, every lineup you make at the beginning, if you're given the chance to change, given new information, should be changed. So you can think about that. All right, so we'll get out of here. Lock in 3 minutes, and then obviously there's a million changes you can make between now and the end of the slate. I just need to remember to do that, so we have like a couple hours still of content to do. I have to remember to pay a little attention to this early slate. But okay, we'll be back at 12:45.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, sounds